Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In 2009, a woman walking her dog on Albuquerque's West Mesa made a discovery that would unearth one of the Southwest's most chilling mysteries. What started as a single bone protruding from the desert sand would lead investigators to the remains of 11 women and an unborn child, victims of what appears to be a methodical serial killer who preyed on society's most vulnerable. Tonight, we dive into the haunting case of the West Mesa murders, a story that continues to baffle law enforcement and haunt the city of Albuquerque to this day. Let's begin. In February 2009, on a cold, windswept morning in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Christine Ross was walking her dog along the city's West Mesa when something caught her attention. Her dog had found what appeared to be a human bone protruding from the sandy soil. That discovery would lead investigators to one of the most disturbing crime scenes in New Mexico's history and spark an investigation that continues to haunt law enforcement to this day. The West Mesa, a vast desert plateau on the city's western edge, had long been a place of stark beauty and isolation. But on that February morning, it became the epicenter of what would prove to be one of the Southwest's most chilling unsolved criminal cases. When police arrived at the scene, they quickly confirmed Ross's grim discovery. What began as a single bone would eventually reveal a mass grave containing the remains of 11 women and an unborn child. The victims had disappeared between 2001 and 2005. Their absences creating ripples of concern through Albuquerque's most vulnerable communities. Many of the women had been involved in sex work or struggled with addiction, making them perfect targets for a predator who knew their disappearances might not immediately raise alarms. The first victim identified was Victoria Chavez, who had vanished in 2004. Her family had never stopped searching for her, but like many families of missing persons involved in high-risk lifestyles, they had encountered roadblocks and dismissive attitudes from some authorities. As more remains were uncovered, more names were added to the list: Julie Nieto, Michelle Valdez, Cinnamon Elks, Veronica Romero, Monica Candelaria, Doreen Marquez, Virginia Cloven, Evelyn Salazar, Jamie Barella, and Selenia Edwards. The story of these women wasn't just about their deaths, it was about their lives. Monica Candelaria, for instance, was remembered by her family as a loving mother who had fallen into addiction, but was trying to turn her life around. Julie Nieto's sister would later tell reporters that Julie had a beautiful singing voice and dreamed of becoming a professional singer before drugs derailed her life. These were women with hopes, dreams, and families who loved them deeply. The investigation revealed that the killer had taken great care to bury the bodies in a specific pattern, suggesting a methodical, organized perpetrator. The remains were found in roughly the same area, buried at similar depths, indicating that the killer likely returned to the same location multiple times over several years. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was the work of someone who had carefully planned and executed these murders. Forensic analysis showed that most of the women had been strangled, though the advanced decomposition of the remains made it difficult to determine exact causes of death in every case. The killer had stripped the victims of clothing and jewelry, leaving few forensic traces behind. The desert environment had also taken its toll on any potential evidence, with years of harsh sun, wind, and sand erasing many clues that might have helped identify the perpetrator. The presence of Selenia Edwards among the victims added another layer of complexity to the case. Unlike the other victims, Edwards was from Lawton, Oklahoma, and was only 15 years old when she disappeared. Her presence in the burial ground suggested that the killer might have operated across state lines, potentially claiming victims in other locations that remained undiscovered. The timing of the murders was particularly significant. All of the women had disappeared between 2001 and 2005, and then the killings appeared to stop. This sudden cessation led investigators to consider several possibilities. Had the killer died, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply moved to a different location to continue his deadly work? The investigation would soon focus on several persons of interest. One was Lorenzo Montoya, a man who lived near the burial site and had been arrested in 2006 for strangling a prostitute. Montoya was killed in self-defense by the woman's boyfriend before he could be questioned about any connection to the West Mesa murders. The timing of his death roughly corresponded with the end of the killings, making him a compelling suspect. Another person of interest was Joseph Blair, dubbed the mid-school rapist, for a series of sexual assaults he committed in Albuquerque during the 1980s and 1990s. While serving time for those crimes, investigators noted similarities between his known victims and the women found on West Mesa. However, no physical evidence has ever linked him conclusively to the murders. The investigation was complicated by the fact that many of the victims had been involved in sex work along Albuquerque's Central Avenue, an area known locally as the war zone due to its high crime rate. This meant they had potentially encountered numerous dangerous individuals, any of whom could have been responsible for their deaths. The discovery of the burial ground also forced a painful reckoning within the Albuquerque Police Department. Many families of the victims had reported their loved ones missing years before, but felt their concerns had been dismissed or minimized because of the women's lifestyles. The case highlighted a troubling pattern in how missing persons cases involving marginalized individuals were handled, leading to changes in department policies and procedures. As the investigation continued, detectives compiled thousands of pages of reports, conducted hundreds of interviews, and collected countless pieces of potential evidence. They created detailed timelines of each victim's last known movements, trying to find patterns or connections that might lead to their killer. The FBI became involved, bringing additional resources and expertise to the investigation. The FBI's involvement brought sophisticated analytical tools to the investigation, including geographic profiling. This technique suggested that the killer was likely familiar with Albuquerque's West Mesa area, either living or working nearby during the period of the murders. The careful selection of the burial site, remote enough to avoid detection but accessible enough for repeated visits, supported this theory. The investigation also revealed a disturbing pattern in the victims' disappearances. Many of them had last been seen in the early morning hours, between 1 and 5 a.m. along Central Avenue. This timing suggested the killer was someone who either worked nights or was comfortable operating during these hours when the streets were less crowded, but sex workers were still active. One crucial development came when investigators discovered photographs taken by a police helicopter in 2004, showing tire tracks and disturbed soil in the area that would later be identified as the burial ground. These aerial photographs, taken years before the bodies were discovered, provided valuable timeline information, but also raised troubling questions about missed opportunities to stop the killer sooner. Detective Ida Lopez, who had been tracking the disappearances of sex workers since 2004, emerged as a key figure in connecting the cases. She had maintained a detailed spreadsheet of missing women, noting patterns and similarities long before the bodies were discovered. Her work proved invaluable in helping identify the victims and establishing the timeline of disappearances. The investigation also brought to light the story of Darlene Trujillo, who survived an attack in 2006 that bore striking similarities to the West Mesa cases. Trujillo reported being picked up by a man who attempted to strangle her before she managed to escape. Her description of the attacker and his methods added another piece to the puzzle, though the suspect she described has never been definitively linked to the West Mesa murders. In 2010, investigators received an unexpected lead when a woman came forward claiming her ex-husband might have been involved in the murders. She described how he would often drive to the West Mesa area late at night and return home in the early morning hours during the period when the women were disappearing. While this lead was thoroughly investigated, like many others, it ultimately led to no arrests. The case also drew attention to similar unsolved murders in other parts of the Southwest. In Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, hundreds of women had disappeared under similar circumstances throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. While no direct connection was ever established between these cases and the West Mesa murders, the patterns of targeting vulnerable women raised concerns about possible links or copycat killers. The investigation revealed that several of the victims had attempted to leave sex work and drug use behind. Doreen Marquez had enrolled in college courses and was working to regain custody of her children. Virginia Cloven had recently completed a drug rehabilitation program and was making plans for her future. These details made their murders even more tragic, as they were killed just as they were trying to turn their lives around. The case had a profound impact on Albuquerque's law enforcement approach to missing persons cases. The police department established new protocols for handling reports of missing sex workers and other vulnerable individuals. They also created a special unit dedicated to investigating cases involving women in high-risk situations, acknowledging that these cases required specific expertise and resources. In 2013, detectives revealed that they had collected DNA evidence from some of the remains, though the quality was poor due to environmental degradation. This evidence was entered into national databases, but no matches have been found to date. The killer appears to have no criminal record, at least none that would have required DNA submission to law enforcement databases. The investigation also explored possible connections to several construction projects that were ongoing in the West Mesa area during the period of the murders. The killer would have needed access to earth-moving equipment to dig the graves, leading investigators to scrutinize construction workers and contractors who had worked in the area. This angle produced several persons of interest, but no definitive suspects. As the years passed, the case continued to evolve. In 2016, investigators began using new ground-penetrating radar technology to search additional areas of the West Mesa, responding to tips about possible additional burial sites. While these searches haven't uncovered new victims, they demonstrate law enforcement's ongoing commitment to solving the case. The West Mesa murders also sparked important conversations about the relationship between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Many advocates pointed out that the deaths might have been prevented if the initial missing persons reports had been taken more seriously. This criticism led to the formation of several community outreach programs designed to build trust between police and vulnerable populations. The impact of the West Mesa murders extended far beyond the immediate investigation. Local advocacy groups began organizing regular outreach efforts to women involved in sex work, providing resources, support, and safety information. These initiatives, while born from tragedy, have potentially saved countless lives by helping vulnerable individuals access services and escape dangerous situations. The case also highlighted the crucial role of technology in modern criminal investigations. In 2017, investigators began utilizing advanced DNA analysis techniques that weren't available when the bodies were first discovered. This included attempting to create genetic genealogy profiles, similar to the method that helped solve the Golden State Killer case. While these efforts haven't yet yielded a breakthrough, they represent the ongoing evolution of the investigation. One particularly intriguing aspect of the case emerged when investigators discovered that several of the victims had mentioned a photographer who would approach women on Central Avenue, offering to take their pictures for modeling portfolios. This lead was extensively investigated, as similar ruses had been used by serial killers in other cases, including Harvey Gall and William Bradford. However, Despite following up on numerous tips about local photographers, this angle has yet to produce a viable suspect. The investigation also revealed disturbing patterns in how the killer selected and approached his victims. Several surviving sex workers from the same period reported encounters with a man who seemed particularly interested in women with substance abuse issues. He would allegedly offer them drugs, suggesting he understood how to exploit their vulnerabilities. These accounts helped investigators build a psychological profile of the killer as someone who was methodical, patient, and skilled at gaining the trust of his victims. In 2019, on the 10th anniversary of the discovery, Detective Ida Lopez spoke publicly about the case's lasting impact on the community and law enforcement. She emphasized how the investigation had changed police procedures, noting that reports of missing sex workers are now treated with immediate urgency. "These women matter," she stated in a press conference. "Their lives matter, their stories matter, and we haven't forgotten them." The case has also drawn attention to the broader issue of violence against Native American women, as several of the victims had Native American heritage. This aspect of the case connected it to the larger crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women across the American Southwest, highlighting how certain populations are particularly vulnerable to predatory violence. Another significant development came when investigators began re-examining cold cases from the 1980s and 1990s in Albuquerque, looking for possible connections to the West Mesa murders. This review led to the discovery of several unsolved murders with similar characteristics, though no definitive links have been established. The possibility that the killer had been active for much longer than initially suspected added another layer of complexity to the investigation. The construction angle continued to yield interesting leads. Investigators discovered that several large-scale development projects had been active in the West Mesa area during the period of the murders. One project, in particular, had employed a worker who was later convicted of assault in another state. While this individual was thoroughly investigated, no evidence directly linked him to the murders. However, the construction sites provided the killer with both the means to dispose of bodies and a legitimate reason to be in the area. In 2020, a new team of cold case investigators began reviewing the case files with fresh eyes. They focused particularly on the timeline of disappearances, noting that they seemed to follow a seasonal pattern, with more women vanishing during the warmer months. This could suggest the killer's work or personal life was affected by seasonal changes, another clue to his identity and habits. The investigation also benefited from advances in digital forensics. Investigators began using sophisticated software to analyze cell phone data from the period, hoping to identify patterns of movement around the burial site. While much of this historical data was limited, it provided new insights into the flow of traffic through the area during the crucial time period. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the case emerged through interviews with the victims' families. Many spoke of their loved ones' struggles with addiction and their attempts to get clean. Jamie Barella's mother revealed that her daughter had been planning to enter rehabilitation the week she disappeared. Monica Candelaria's family shared that she had been saving money to return to school. These stories emphasized how the killer had robbed not just lives, but potential futures. The investigation also explored possible connections to similar cases in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and El Paso, where sex workers had disappeared under mysterious circumstances during the same period. While no direct links were established, the pattern of targeting vulnerable women in Southwest cities suggested the possibility of a larger criminal network or a mobile killer. In 2021, investigators began using artificial intelligence software to analyze patterns in the case data, hoping to identify connections that human investigators might have missed. This technology helped create new geographic and temporal profiles of the killer's activities, suggesting he likely lived within a specific radius of the burial site and followed regular patterns in his daily life. The case has also become a catalyst for change in how missing persons cases are handled nationwide. Many police departments have studied the West Mesa investigation as a cautionary tale, leading to reforms in how they handle reports of missing persons from vulnerable populations. The tragedy has thus sparked positive changes that may prevent similar cases from going unnoticed in the future. Recent developments in the case have included the use of isotope analysis on the victim's remains, a technique that can help determine where a person lived based on chemical signatures in their bones. This analysis has provided new insights into the victims' movements in the months before their deaths, potentially helping to narrow down where they encountered their killer. The isotope analysis proved particularly revealing in the case of Selenia Edwards, the youngest victim. The results suggested she had spent time in multiple locations across the Southwest before her death, indicating she may have been trafficked. This information opened new avenues of investigation as detectives began exploring possible connections between the West Mesa murders and human trafficking networks operating in the region during the early 2000s. In 2022, investigators made another significant push to solve the case by implementing advanced familial DNA testing. While traditional DNA analysis had yielded no matches in criminal databases, this newer technique allowed them to search for potential relatives of the killer. The process involved creating a wider genetic net, similar to the methods used in genetic genealogy that have helped solve other cold cases across the country. The investigation also benefited from renewed media attention, following several true crime documentaries that featured the case. These programs generated hundreds of new tips, including several from former construction workers who had been active in the West Mesa area during the relevant time period. While many of these leads proved fruitless, each one was meticulously investigated, adding to the massive case file. One particularly interesting lead came from a former security guard who had worked at a construction site near the burial ground. He recalled seeing suspicious activity late at night, including a light-colored pickup truck that would frequently park in the area. While he hadn't thought much of it at the time, his detailed description of the vehicle and its timing pattern provided investigators with new information to cross-reference against their existing timeline. The investigation also revealed that several of the victims had connections to the same drug dealers operating in Albuquerque's war zone. This led to a thorough review of drug-related arrests and convictions from the early 2000s, searching for potential suspects who might have had contact with multiple victims. While this angle hasn't yet produced a breakthrough, it helped establish a clearer picture of the victims' social networks and possible points of contact with their killer. Detectives also began exploring the possibility that the killer might have been involved in law enforcement or security work. The methodical nature of the crimes, the careful site selection, and the ability to operate without detection suggested someone with knowledge of police procedures. This theory was particularly disturbing, as it might explain why the killer was able to avoid detection for so long. In 2023, investigators announced the creation of a new task force specifically dedicated to the West Mesa case. This team included not only local detectives, but also experts in geological analysis, forensic anthropology, and criminal psychology. Their multidisciplinary approach brought fresh perspectives to the investigation, including new theories about the killer's possible occupation and lifestyle. The task force's work led to the development of a more detailed psychological profile of the killer. Based on the evidence, they believe he would have been someone who maintained a stable public persona while harboring deep-seated anger toward women. The profile suggested he likely held a steady job, possibly in a position of authority, and would have been viewed by others as reliable and organized. The investigation also benefited from advances in digital mapping technology. Using sophisticated software, investigators created detailed three-dimensional models of the burial site, analyzing factors such as soil composition, depth patterns, and the positioning of the remains. This analysis revealed that the graves had been dug with consistent depth and spacing, suggesting the killer had possibly used marking systems or measurements to maintain organization. One of the most challenging aspects of the case has been the possibility that the killer might have claimed more victims in other locations. The task force began working with law enforcement agencies across the Southwest to identify similar unsolved cases, particularly those involving sex workers or women struggling with addiction. This broader approach has helped create a more comprehensive database of possibly related crimes. The investigation has also focused on understanding why the killings appeared to stop in 2005. One theory suggests that the rapid development of the West Mesa area during this period might have forced the killer to abandon his preferred disposal site. This could mean he either stopped killing or found another location to hide his victims. The possibility of additional burial sites remains a serious concern for investigators. Recent interviews with former sex workers who worked Central Avenue during the early 2000s have provided new insights into the atmosphere of fear that pervaded the area during the time of the murders. Several women recalled being warned about a particular client who would become aggressive if refused certain requests, though descriptions of this individual varied significantly. The task force has also begun using advanced data analytics to examine patterns in missing persons reports from the surrounding states during the same time period. This analysis has revealed several cases with similar characteristics to the West Mesa murders, though establishing definitive connections has proved challenging due to the passage of time and limited available evidence. In late 2023, investigators announced they were exploring potential connections between the West Mesa murders and several unsolved cases in southern Colorado. These cases, involving women with similar backgrounds to the West Mesa victims, occurred in the years immediately following the cessation of the Albuquerque killings, raising the possibility that the killer had relocated rather than stopped. The investigation continues to evolve as new technologies and investigative techniques become available. The commitment of law enforcement to solving this case remains unwavering, driven by the understanding that somewhere, perhaps still in Albuquerque, the West Mesa killer might be living a normal life, harboring the darkest of secrets. The case has become a powerful reminder of the importance of treating every missing persons report with equal urgency, regardless of the individual's background or lifestyle. It stands as a testament to the need for continued vigilance in protecting society's most vulnerable members, and the importance of never giving up on the pursuit of justice, no matter how much time has passed. The legacy of the West Mesa murders continues to influence law enforcement practices and community responses to violence against vulnerable populations. In early 2024, the Albuquerque Police Department announced the implementation of a new digital tip line specifically dedicated to collecting information about the case. This system allows individuals to submit anonymous tips through a secure platform, addressing concerns that potential witnesses might be hesitant to come forward through traditional channels. The investigation has also begun incorporating advanced artificial intelligence systems to analyze historical cell phone data from the early 2000s. While this data is limited compared to what would be available in a contemporary investigation, AI algorithms have helped identify patterns in cell tower activations near the burial site during the presumed times of the murders. This analysis has generated several new persons of interest based on regular movement patterns in the area. One significant recent development involved the discovery of old surveillance footage from a now defunct gas station that once operated near the West Mesa area. Though partially degraded, the footage from 2004 shows several vehicles matching witness descriptions of suspicious activity during the period of the murders. Forensic video analysts are currently working to enhance these images using state-of-the-art restoration techniques. The task force has also begun exploring connections between the West Mesa cases and similar crimes in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. While geographical distance makes a direct connection unlikely, investigators have noted striking similarities in victim selection and disposal methods. This international cooperation has led to the sharing of valuable investigative techniques and data between law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border. Another promising avenue of investigation emerged when researchers at the University of New Mexico began analyzing soil samples from the burial site using new chemical detection methods. This analysis has revealed traces of specific pollens and minerals that could help narrow down the killer's movements and potentially connect them to specific construction sites or areas of employment during the early 2000s. The investigation has also benefited from renewed cooperation with federal agencies. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit recently completed an updated profile of the killer, suggesting they believe he would now be in his 50s or 60s, likely still living in the Southwest, and possibly working in a position that continues to give him access to vulnerable populations. This profile has helped focus investigative resources on specific demographic and occupational categories. Community involvement in the case has remained strong, with several advocacy groups organizing annual memorial events for the victims. These gatherings serve not only to remember the women who lost their lives, but also to keep public attention focused on the ongoing investigation. Family members of the victims regularly attend these events, sharing stories about their loved ones and reminding the public that these women were more than just victims. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends. The case has also led to significant changes in how missing persons cases are handled nationally. The West Mesa Protocol, as it's now known in law enforcement circles, provides guidelines for responding to missing persons reports involving individuals from vulnerable populations. This protocol emphasizes the importance of immediate response and thorough investigation, regardless of the missing person's background or lifestyle. Recent interviews with former associates of the victims have yielded new insights into their final days. Several individuals have come forward with information about a man who frequently offered women rides in a white pickup truck during the early 2000s. While this lead has been investigated before, new details about the vehicle's distinctive modifications have provided investigators with additional angles to pursue. The task force has also begun using genetic genealogy techniques to analyze DNA samples collected from the burial site. While environmental degradation has made this process challenging, advances in DNA analysis have allowed researchers to extract useful genetic information from previously unusable samples. This work continues in laboratories across the country, as experts work to build a genetic profile that might lead to the killer's identity. Perhaps most significantly, the investigation has revealed that several of the victims had attempted to report threatening encounters to law enforcement in the months before their disappearances. These reports, which were often treated as low priority at the time, are now being re-examined with fresh eyes. Patterns have emerged suggesting that multiple women had encountered someone who made them uncomfortable enough to contact police, though they were unable to provide detailed descriptions. The case has also drawn attention from criminal justice reform advocates who point to the West Mesa murders as an example of how societal prejudices can hamper investigations. The initial dismissal of missing persons reports involving sex workers and individuals struggling with addiction likely allowed the killer to continue operating undetected for years. This recognition has led to fundamental changes in how law enforcement agencies approach cases involving marginalized individuals. The possibility that the killer might have claimed additional victims continues to haunt investigators. Recent searches using ground-penetrating radar in areas similar to the West Mesa site have been conducted throughout New Mexico and neighboring states. While these searches haven't yielded additional victims, they demonstrate law enforcement's commitment to finding all possible victims and bringing complete closure to affected families. The investigation remains active and evolving, with new leads being generated through both traditional police work and cutting-edge technology. The determination to solve these crimes has not diminished with the passage of time. Instead, each new development in forensic science and investigative techniques brings fresh hope that the West Mesa killer will eventually be identified and brought to justice. The case serves as a somber reminder of the ongoing vulnerability of marginalized populations and the importance of treating every missing person's case with equal urgency and thoroughness. The women of West Mesa may have been targeted because their killer believed their disappearances would go unnoticed, but their legacy has helped ensure that such assumptions will never again hinder the pursuit of justice in Albuquerque or beyond.